folks, Dave here at Thunder Mesa Studio, where I am once again working on the Gruesome Gulch mini layout, trying to get it done in time for Halloween this year. And as you can see, I've already made a start on some of the above ground scenery, the rock work up here. But basically this is just an experiment, a test to see if some of the techniques I had in mind for this would work on this layout. And don't worry, I'll go into a great detail later on about how I'm carving and finishing all of this rock work. But before I get into that, the first thing I need to do, or the next thing, is to build a show building to house all of the spooky effects that are going to be happening over on this side of the layout in Cadaver Caverns. And once again, to accomplish this, I'm turning to my 1-inch thick XPF foam, and I've cut a bunch of pieces that are 5 inches high to give me plenty of clearance and room to work back here inside the caverns. So now I'm just going to take and box all of this area in. Now, just as I did in the previous video on building the bench work, I'm securing everything together with some Loctite Power Grab adhesive on all of the corners, where everything mates up. This is the best glue I've ever found for working with XPF foam. And then while the glue dries, I'm pinning everything in place with some 1 1/4 inch drywall screws. All right, let's cut the next piece. Alright, well, I've got my show building all laid out, and pretty happy with that so far. Of course, everything is going to be, disguised with scenery and rock work, so it won't look so much like a building or a box. But now I need to figure out how the little town, the ghost town, relates to this, because this is pretty high. This is 5 inches up above this track level, and my plan has always been to have the road come in under this bridge here and kind of and so the town will be built on different levels up to Boot Hill, which is going to be up here at the crest of the hill. So now I need to do some creative engineering and basically figure out the layout, the basic layout of the town, and build all that up with foam. The original plan was to have the town a little bit further down this way, closer to the depot, but looking at this now in 3 dimensions, it actually makes more sense to push the town a little bit further down this way and a little bit higher up. Hide most of this. But that's what we do when we start working in the real world. We've got to make adjustments. This will actually make for a pretty cool scene, I think. As the road climbs up from down below track level, crosses behind the depot, which is going to stay here, and then comes up here into town and makes a left up here to Boot Hill. Yeah, I think that'll work. Kind of buildings coming up the hillside like that. Yeah. I like it. So now I'm roughing in the road, which leads up from below the trestle over here, up through town, basically up to the top of the hill where Boot Hill is going to be, on a removable piece, so I can access the inside of the caverns. And I'm just roughing it in with this is some white chipboard, which is cheap and flexible, perfect for this kind of thing. Just a lot of trial and error cutting it to get the right shape. Now I can glue it into place. most important thing is I need to line up right there. Yeah. Okay. My goal here as I work on this is to use as many lightweight materials as I possibly can, as opposed to heavy stuff like sculpt-a-mold or plaster. I want this to be very lightweight, so I'm going to minimize the use of those things as much as I can in the scenery as we move forward. Well, I hope you'll forgive me for jumping ahead just a little bit. I'm just really excited about this new technique for doing rock work. I wanted something different, a different look than what I have on the Thunder Mesa layout, where everything's supposed to be sandstone and limestone, layers of sedimentary rock. What I'm going for here is layers of ancient volcanic ash, which has now been eroded away. So I'm ready to start, or finish really, doing the rock work on the whole front of the layout here. So let's back up and I'll show you exactly how I make these rocks. Now the first step is to cut a blank out of some XPF for the area that you want to cover with rock work. This technique works better if you work on small pieces at a time, and I like to do most of the actual carving over at the workbench to save making this a huge mess as much as possible. To because this technique creates a lot of little bits of foam and debris. So here I've got a piece of 2-inch thick XPF, which I have left over from an earlier project, and I'm just kind of figuring out where to cut it using my hot wire cutter, kind of trimming it down to size. So it'll fit there. Kind of want it, yeah. I can actually go back a little further. I don't need all this. Yeah, that'll work. All right, now let's take this over to the workbench. Now I've decided to have the layers of strata angled, as if these were ancient layers of volcanic ash, and they've been pushed up by maybe more volcanic activity or earthquakes or something like that. So I created a master which matches the angle of all of the rocks, so they'll be consistent across the whole layout. So I just use that to transfer that line there. Now I'm going to use my ruler to make horizontal lines, or matching parallel lines, I should say, not horizontal. And that is the beginning of my little bit of rock formation. Now I can take my hot wire cutter and just go in and start randomly taking pieces off here and there. The thing about carving rock formations, or trying to replicate any natural phenomenon, be it tree bark or rocks or whatever, is that the human instinct is to create parallel lines, very unnatural looking, almost brick shapes. If you just left to our own devices, that's what we'll do. And so you kind of have to battle that and come up with techniques that'll give you a more natural looking result. And by the way, the hot wire cutter isn't really one of them. This is just the first step. I'm just using it to create a little variety here in the shapes. cutting away the larger pieces that I'm not going to want. Already making a mess. So there's our basic shape, but doesn't really look much like rocks yet. So the next tool I want to use is a utility knife. And just go in and start carving and really breaking pieces away. One of the ways to get a natural look is to, rather than cut and plan, is to break the pieces off, right? Because you're going to get a much more randomized look doing that than trying to, carve it to look like rock. It's already looking a little better. So yeah, I'm just using the knife, just kind of gouging and not being real careful. Well, I'm being careful not to cut myself. But not being too precious about it at all as far as where I'm making these cuts. The only thing I'm keeping in mind is these diagonal lines of strata, trying to keep that as consistent as I can, though even that is not super important as long as it looks right across the entire layout. You can get away with fudging it a little bit here and there. I'm not measuring. Now, don't forget the ends of these pieces too. That's really important. All right, let's do some up here. Sometimes I'll just, get my fingers in there, break pieces off like that. Gouge down. It's a good way to get your aggressions out too, just kind of breaking pieces off. And I realize at this stage it doesn't look like much, but wait for it. It all comes together in the end. Creating some blocks here where erosion has split these pieces apart. All right, that's not a bad start. Break that a little bit more. Now, the next tool is a metal or wire brush like this. This one's got stainless steel bristles on it. You could use different kinds. And I'm just going to go with the grain of the strata like this. And you see how that's just eating that away? Now this is going to give you a much more natural look than you get trying to carve this stuff by hand and trying to, make it look like a rock with your carving. See how it eats out those little pieces like that? And of course, the more you do it, the deeper these grooves are going to get. So you can vary it. In some places you can do a lot. Really chew it up like that. Some places you could do it more lightly, just to give the look of that those horizontal layers. Once again, don't forget the ends. see, this makes quite a mess. Good idea to have a shop vac nearby and handy. Once you do this, of course, you're creating all of these micro cuts in the foam, and it gets very spongy. Not only that, but it's there's a lot of loose pieces and debris. So I thought there's got to be a way to, once you do this step, there's got to be a way to clean this up and give it a more finished look. And that brings us to the tool, which is really the secret weapon of this technique, a heat gun. You gotta be careful. You don't want to overdo it. But you just go in and just lightly pass over the top, and you can see as I do this what will happen. You see that? It gets rid of all the fuzz and the sponginess, and suddenly it looks a lot more like rock. It's almost like a magic trick. And if you don't have a heat gun like this, I'll put a link down below where you can pick one up. There's a lot of different brands. I really like this one. It's easy to use and handle. It's small. Of course, the more you do it, the more it's going to smooth different areas out. And of course, all you have to do to bring those back is hit it with the wire brush again. It's getting a little too smooth looking for your tastes. But smooth is not necessarily bad. There's a lot of smooth rock out there. To get a little too close, like I did just there, you get kind of a bubbly look, which is great for simulating volcanic rock. All right, I think that is ready. A little more down here. All right, now it's ready to put into place. A little power grab on there. There we go. Now, since these rocks overlap, I've already got a base coat of dark gray on the rocks behind it, because I wouldn't be able to necessarily reach back there after this piece was in place. And I'll get into the painting of the rocks a little bit later. Now for this area up here, I'm just going to carve it into this existing piece of foam and do a little work right here on the layout. In retrospect, it probably would have been smarter to do this before I put it into place, but hey. All right, well now I can finish up all the rest of the rock work on the front side of the layout. So I've been working on this for the past couple of days, and I've reached a point where I really need to make a decision about what to do next. Either to continue working with the foam and build up Skull Butte, which is going to be right here, and Boot Hill over here. These will be on some removable panels that I can just lift out to access the caverns back here. Or I can go ahead and finish all the rock work up in the front. Get it to a point where it's all done. And I think that's what I want to do, because really this is a whole other project up here, the butte and the whole top of the layout. That's a whole other project. That'll probably be a whole other video. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up all of this rock work down here. We'll get it painted, and you can see how that process goes. And that way, you'll actually get to see this video in a much more timely manner. So let's jump into that. So I'm going to remove everything that I have up here that's just kind of sitting here temporarily. Structures and such. Get that off. And then what I want to do is I'm going to mix up a little bit of Sculptamold. Not a lot. Just enough to blend the ends of some of these formations together, fill in a few gaps. I don't want to use very much Sculptamold because, for one thing, I really like the way these rock formations look as they are, and I don't want to cover over the carving that I did. And also, I don't want to add a lot of weight. So I'm going to mix up a little bit of that and just kind of blend some things together. And then, when that's dry, we can move on to the final painting. The first thing I'm going to do is protect this track with some masking tape, because I don't want to get any paint or Sculptamold on that. So the way I like to mix up this Sculptamold, got about 2 cups here. Put it inside a Ziploc bag, and I just start adding water until I get it to the consistency that I want. I can just mix it just like this. I want kind of a thick paste. I don't want it to be runny. And if you watch my other scenery videos, you know that Sculptamold is one of my favorite products to use for building scenery. It dries very strong and hard, but it still remains relatively lightweight because it's a mixture of plaster and cellulose paper, basically. So it's kind of like stronger paper mache. You can add pigment to it, either latex paint or dry pigment. If you add latex paint to it, it's actually going to make it really going to slow the drying time down dramatically. Make it take much longer to dry. I could add some dry pigment to it, but I don't happen to have any of it handy. So I'm just going to do this like I usually do it. Mix it up, let it dry white, and then paint everything. Got my usual sculpting tools, an assortment of palette knives, one of my favorites, which is just a good old butter knife, clay sculpting tools. I get them all out, but I'm probably going to end up only using 1 or 2 of these. I'm really not looking to do a lot of sculpting, just kind of blending together. Now, the advantage of using the Ziploc bag is now I can just I can close up the bag first of all, get all the extra air out, and then roll it up, kind of like a pastry tube, just like if you were using a frost a cake. So you end up with a point down at one end. I can snip just a little bit off. I don't want a whole bunch to come out at once. Oops. And then I can just squeeze it back into the cracks like that. Now I can just squeeze it out where I want it one of the places in particular here is I want to blend in my road with the foam. So I'm just going to put a little bit in that seam. And as it starts to set up, it'll get easier to work with. I'll be able to blend it in a little bit better. Right now I'm just trying to get it into the places where I want it. And hopefully not in the places where I don't. And this is one of those things that's easier to do than it is to describe. But you work with this stuff a little bit and you get a hang of it pretty quickly. You can already see that one of the best tools to blend this together on this project is going to be just a soft paintbrush. As soon as the sculpted mold starts sticking to it, you just dip it in a little water. Very good for smoothing things out. Let's get some more back in this corner here. I'm going to join these two pieces together. Sometimes too, the best tool is your finger. Don't be afraid to get your hands in there. Now I want to fill in all of this over here. Just basically doing the transitions where it goes from one piece to another. Certainly don't want to fill in all of the gaps because the gaps between the rocks are one of the things that makes it interesting, that makes it look realistic. Because that's what you find in nature. It's not just all one big contiguous piece, there's lots of little bits and pieces. Yeah, since I'm not really sculpting this, I'm just blending. The brush is the best tool. Just about got the rocks all blended together, but now I've made up another little bit wetter batch of sculpted mold that I'm going to use to add a crown to the road here. Just going to kind of trowel it on with my hobby knife, or my palette knife, I should say. Don't really want this very thick, really not any more than a 1/16 of an inch thick, so kind of spread it down, starting at the top of the hill and working my way down. Letting gravity help me out a little bit. Now once again, I want to take my wet paintbrush, not only smooth this out, but add some subtle ruts in the road here. Obviously a road on a hillside like this, water would run down it and create ruts. And even though this is going to be a ghost town, I have the evidence of old wagons going through here once upon a time. I've let this all set up for about an hour, and I'm just taking a wire brush, very similar to what I did on the foam, and going over the sculpted mold while it's still a little bit soft, to add some matching strata lines so it all blends together nicely. Okay. That's pretty good. We'll let all this dry overnight and come back tomorrow, finish it up with some paint. Well, as the fellow at the paint counter said when I had him mix this color up for me, yep, that's gray, all right. You know he's not wrong. It's specifically, it's color called pewter gray, which is an apple barrel product, apple barrel acrylic craft paint, and it's the color I chose for the base coat on all of my scenery here on the Gruesome Gulch. It's kind of a nice, spooky, bluish, greenish gray. It's hard to describe, actually. It looks different in different kinds of light, but I'm going to put some of this in a smaller container, and we'll get painting on the layout here. We'll start up here on the top. Now this is going to go on pretty dark, especially after it dries. But I figured it makes a good base coat, and then I can come back and lighten things up with successive layers of color. Add a little bit of water to it, just to thin it out a little bit, make it penetrate down into all the cracks and crevices of my rock work. As usual, this is going to take a minute, so let's do a time lapse. I've got a big box fan pointed at this to help the paint dry more quickly, and this is when I go in with a smaller brush, not too small, and try to find all the hundreds of little spots that I missed with the first pass in the paint. It's amazing. Once the paint becomes shiny like this, it fools your eye, and it's really hard to tell if you've covered everything or not. And only after it starts to dry and becomes matte, then you can see all of the spots you missed. And there are usually hundreds of them. So that's what I'm doing right now, filling in all the little spots. I especially want to cover any of that white sculpted mold that might still show through. Well, now that this paint is just about dry, I'm going to go over everything with a dark wash. This is some Mars Black acrylic mixed with burnt umber and a whole lot of water in a spray bottle. And this will darken up those cracks and crevices a little bit, and hopefully also fill in any spots I still may have missed with the paintbrush. Now, once again, we wait for everything to dry. I think this is dry enough now. It's not completely dry yet, but I'm gonna go ahead and risk it because I'm excited. This is my favorite part of the whole process, is rendering these rocks out. Now that I've got the scenic base coat on here, this dark gray, makes it look kind of like a moonscape. Now I'm going to mix up a color. I'm going to use a 50-50 mix, I think. This is my scenic base coat, the light scenic base color that I use on the Thunder Mesa layout. It's basically kind of this light tan. So I'm going to mix this 50-50 with this pewter gray. So I'm going to lighten up the pewter gray, but also gray down that tan at the same time. Now I've got a good color to contrast with this darker gray. Something a little bit lighter and warmer. And I'm going to use the same brush that I used to apply the base. The difference is when I applied the base, I painted mostly with the grain, And what I want to do now is go against the grain like that. Just hit the tops and let the darker gray show through underneath. A lot of people, I've shared some photos of this process, work in progress on social media. A lot of people mentioned the resemblance to the Vasquez rocks, which are in California and have been in hundreds of Western movies and episodes of Star Trek and sci-fi movies and stuff like that. And I have to be honest, I didn't really set out in the beginning to model the Vasquez rocks specifically, but I wanted something that had kind of that otherworldly feel. I think I mentioned earlier what I'm going for here is layers of eroded volcanic ash. So I think the resemblance to the Vasquez rocks was kind of subliminal on my part. Wasn't something I set out to do, just a happy accident. Yeah, I like that. So now I'm just going to go all over the whole thing and hit the tops of the texture. Bring that out. And once again, you got to always remember that acrylics and latex paints dry a shade darker than they go on. And if that paint is still a little wet underneath, I really don't care. It's just going to mix with this paint and blend together a little bit. Not a big deal. It's like there's such a stark difference between how the paint goes on and how it dries. Sometimes I'll put it on and go, oh wow, I screwed up. That's way too light. And then a minute later I'll go back and go, did I even paint that? You can't even see it. It just fades back in. That's working pretty good for me just like that. But a lot of times with these volcanic layers, it's not all just, black and gray. There'll often be some real oxidized layers in there, some real red. Not red like the Thunder Mesa layout, but just kind of a hint of it here and there. So I'm going to mix some burnt sienna with that color I was just using. I'm just going to pick out some of these layers that's got a lot of iron in it. Important to carry it all the way up here. And I'll use my lighter gray tan to kind of blend it in together. So now I'm mixing some of that gray with a light blue, some light blue acrylic. Using that to create some highlights. Once again, trying to keep everything pretty desaturated. No pure colors on here. But the cooler blue will balance out that burnt sienna I just put on here. Now for the final highlight, I'm going to use some of this apple barrel granite gray. Almost the color of ash, which is appropriate. Just kind of dry brushing it on. I think that has about got it. Yeah. I think that'll work. Well, now it's actually starting to look like Gruesome Gulch. At least the way I have always envisioned it in my mind. I want to thank you all for tuning in to this video. I hope you enjoyed learning how I did the rock formations here. And I hope you'll tune in again next time and continue to follow this series and all the projects here at Thunder Mesa Studio. You can hit like and subscribe if you want to see more. You can also follow us on Instagram at thunder.mesa or find out what's new on the Thunder Mesa Studio website at thundermesa.studio. And if you really like what we're doing here on the channel and want to show your support, you can do what these nice folks did and head on over to patreon.com/thundermesa and show your support there. Until next time, keep moving forward, my friends. Adios for now.